I found an envelope that could destroy my family. A few words, written by someone else's hand, and everything I believed in turned into a lie. But I didn't open it right away. Because sometimes, what terrifies you most isn't betrayal. It's the truth you're not ready to face. This is a story about jealousy, trust, and the choices that can change a life forever. If you enjoy deep, emotional, real-life stories, hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Now, listen carefully. I still remember the exact way the kitchen light looked the night something in our house first went soft. It was that flat, honest white that the landlord installed. No dimmer, no color, nothing flattering. Anna was at the sink rinsing plates. I was folding a towel. She hummed an old song under her breath, the kind of little domestic sound that used to mean everything. I turned the towel over in my hands and thought, with a mild, affectionate impatience, how lucky I was. That was the easy part of the memory. The harder part, the one that kept repeating through everything that followed, is how small things started to rearrange themselves around that hum. A text left unread, her keys taking longer to reappear on the hall table, a lipstick stain that got explained as leftover from a student performance, or a rehearsal where someone had apparently stepped into darkness, and the world needed dramatic faces and dramatic mistakes. My name is Ben. I was 39 when the scaffolding of my life felt like it was being unbolted while I still stood on top of it. Anna and I had been together 12 years. We met at a bookshop, got married under a willow that she insisted on calling our seasoned tree, and traded our 20s for mortgages and a rescue mutt named Gus. I sold systems integration. She taught humanities at the community college and directed one production every season. You'd say we were ordinary in that blessed way, not unhappy, not unexcited, just steady. That steadiness is what made what happened later feel like a betrayal of weather, like seasons flipping without warning. Jealousy didn't arrive like a blow. It arrived like a smear of grease on a white shirt. At first you barely notice it, and then one day you realize the stain has sunk in. The first obvious sign was a lecture she said she had to attend. "Budget meeting," she told me. "I'll be late." That same night, there was a picture on the department's Instagram. Anna, a group of colleagues, and a man I didn't know leaning in like he'd always belonged there. He had a pleasant, listening face, the kind you want at dinners and panels. Someone had captioned it, "Great minds and terrible coffee." I remember the first time I looked at his profile. Ethan, it said, visiting lecturer, dramaturgy, works with the community theater. That afternoon, the name meant nothing more than a card in a wallet. A week later, I found myself noticing it everywhere. I tell you that not to make myself dramatic, only to point out how our brains hunt for a story once it begins to suspect one. I didn't start with spying. I tried the humane, reasonable approach. I told myself to trust. I made coffee and left a note in her bag. "Don't forget your jacket. Call me when you're done." I made a spreadsheet for the mortgage payments and didn't add anything else. But then there were the little slippages. A lipstick on a glass in the dishwasher, a canceled weekend because of workload, texts that started with a heart when she used to prefer emojis that looked like faces with sunglasses. I kept making excuses for her. Student emergencies, late rehearsals, a man being someone's go-to for dramaturgical advice. Those are valid things. They are also the scaffolding of plausibility. I followed her once. I parked half a mile away from the theater, the car warm and ridiculous in the mild spring air, and I watched as she walked, small bag swinging into the building. She looked like she always did, luminous in a tired way. To Camden Street regulars, she was a teacher. To me, she was home. I watched through a rain-spotted window as she stepped inside, and 2 chairs later, Ethan sat down beside her. The scene was banal, 2 professionals exchanging notes, but when she leaned in to laugh at something he said, There was a tilt to her head that wasn't toward me. I felt something lurch inside me like a curtain being pulled. I didn't confront her that night. I went home and made tea as if the making of tea could stitch things back. She arrived late, flushed, apologetic. When I asked, she said it was only rehearsal. She said, "He's helping with staging. He has a new technique he wanted to try." I listened to the explanation and felt the way the word explanation can be a soft blade that hides more than it reveals. The second time I followed her, I admitted to myself that it was jealousy steering the car. I sat in my Ford on Maple for what felt like hours, watching the rehearsal room door. When they came out, they moved together easily, colleagues, perhaps friends. He put an elbow casually on the counter, and she leaned into him as if leaning into a warm wall. It is a particular kind of humiliation to watch someone you love with a kindness that isn't for you. You can do the noble thing and call it friendship. You can tell the story you want to tell and sleep with that story in your head. Or you can be less noble and accept that you're being replaced in certain moments by someone else's voice, someone else's attention. Both truths can be true, and both are messy. 1 week later, I found a receipt in Anna's jacket pocket, 2 coffees and an overnight parking ticket near the river, time-stamped at 11:37 p.m. "Just rehearsals," she said when I asked. "They were moving a set." I couldn't get a meter. The timeline made a liar of me more than it made a liar of her. The receipt didn't prove infidelity. It proved an inconvenient fact. Her night did not match the story she told. The difference between a lie and an omission is a small fissure. You can fall through if you don't watch your step. I became methodical in a way that made me ashamed. I started keeping a notebook. Dates, times, inconsistencies. The act of writing felt almost religious. There was the 17th. Anna, late. Instagram post, team night. 23rd, grading versus message from a student that said, "Met up with Dr. L after to discuss scene work." 30th, home early, photo at the back alley bar with Ethan's hand in frame, cropped but visible. The spreadsheet had no mercy. Confession. I did the thing I said I wouldn't. I looked through her phone. People who haven't done it imagine a scandalous treasure trove. The truth is often less tidy. Messages were mostly work-related. There were, however, strings of messages that had a tone I didn't recognize. Not crude, not explicit, but intimate. "Missed your laugh tonight. Can't wait to see that new idea of yours. You looked like you had a light on." A lot of talk about lines and blocking, but the punctuation felt private. No one message was a crime, but the accumulation of private language between them was a small theft, the giving of oneself in parts. I confronted her then, not with the rigid document I'd been assembling, but with a raw, dull panic. "Who is Ethan?" I asked. She sighed, so tired the sound was almost tenderness. "He's a visiting lecturer. He's sharp. He's helpful. He's a good ear." She might as well have poured the words out of a slow, unhelpful jug. "Ben, people help each other. It's not a crime." I wanted a confession. I wanted absolution or a demand for it. What I got was the ordinary defense of someone trying to be faithful to multiple truths at once. The truth of her job, the truth of her needs, the truth of not wanting to hurt me. She told me she loved me. She said the words like a benediction. "I love you," she said. "We built this. We tried to repair. We went to a counselor who taught us active listening and breathing exercises. We set trust agreements and weekly check-ins. It was sweet in the way bandages can be sweet. The rituals held a kind of arithmetic. We set rules and then broke them in shabby human ways. She missed a check-in because of a rehearsal that ran late. I missed a check-in because I was at the office until 9. The life of repair is often more work than the life of quiet. Still, it gives one the illusions of progress. Things were brittle, and then they weren't. It wavered between polite normalcy and the occasional raw wound. A receipt found, a shirt with a scent I didn't recognize. There was a night I came home early to find her profile conversation open, his name at the top of the thread. My hand hovered above the keyboard. The urge to read felt like self-burning. The breaking point came not with a dramatic discovery, but with a small, private detail that landed like a stone. Gus, our dog, used to curl up on Anna's lap every evening. One night she called him off and put him on the floor like she was clearing space for someone. The gesture was so mundane that if someone had snapped a photo, it would have looked like the ordinary domesticity of two people who found small comforts together. But standing there, with the shape of that action in my chest, I realized the smallness of the world that had been rearranged without my permission. I asked her to choose. It was less dramatic than it sounds. "Do you want to be with me?" I asked, voice not much louder than the kettle's whine. She looked at me as if I had asked a question about the weather. "Ben," she said, hands still, "I don't know exactly what I want. I thought I knew, but I don't." She moved out 3 weeks later, not in a car slamming away, no cinematic yelling. She packed a bag, put Gus in our neighbor's care for the weekend, and left me a note on the table. The note said simply, "I need to see who I am." The thing about notes is that they make departures appear intentional, polite, almost tidy. It was awful, and it was sad, and it was also, in its way, realistic. I tried to be the kind of man who took reasonable action. I asked for a separation. We agreed to see other people. We filled out the forms the way adults do. The life of paperwork is a kind of mourning. You translate feeling into fields and tick boxes and sign in triplicate. He, Ethan, came into focus the way a minor character becomes major in a book. She told me, once, that he'd been in her life at a time when she needed someone to talk to about technique, about how to stage a small scene of grief without cheap theatrics. "He listens," she told me, and I remember the exact way she said it, as if the idea of being listened to was a commodity she had been denied for a while. "Ben, you work. You have responsibilities. I need to be seen." I tried to be seen. I scheduled time off. I bought a ticket to a talk she wanted to attend. I tried to be more present in that jokey, clumsy way men sometimes do. But presence isn't only about being there physically. It's about the grammar of attention, the way someone reads you back to yourself. It's a slow, mutual art. I suspect we had failed at the art for years and only noticed when someone else offered the frame. When she returned a few months later, she did so with a quiet different from the one she had left with. She had been living in a spare apartment, she said, rehearsing, teaching, learning to be a person who wasn't defined entirely through the marriage contract. She'd met Ethan a few times. It didn't matter, she said, except for the fact that it did. It mattered to me because of the way small things keep accounts. The nights I ate alone, the jokes that needed a laugh, the small redundancies of love that get noticed once they're missing. Then, and this is the part of the story that will sound like the predictable slider on a playlist, came the thing I didn't expect. She was pregnant. She told me in the kitchen. I came home with a grocery bag full of dinner and found her sitting at the table with a little cup of tea. She looked luminous in a domestic way that used to make me think of the seasons. "Ben," she said, and the word had surprising weight. "I missed something important. I wanted to tell you." My first reaction was a ridiculous, selfish joy. The thought that we had made someone together. The second, quieter thought, a shadow at the edge, was a question. Is this mine? There are moments when you think you will be kind. You think you will be brave. You will make the moral gesture because it is the right thing to do. But the human heart is small in ways we don't expect. I felt a twist of fear. It wasn't logical as a feeling. The pregnancy could very well be mine. Still, the mind makes its own weather. She looked at my face and read me in a way I don't think she had known how to before. She took my hand and said softly, "I know what you're thinking. If it helps, I'm certain it will be fine. He isn't whoever, significant in the biology here. But if you're worried, we can get tests after. She breathed, the sound of someone trying to carve an ordinary path through a landscape that felt anything but ordinary. We went to classes together, antenatal classes with coffee and bananas and trainers who smiled too widely as if all this joy were natural and universal. The world outside, in odd ways, offered its small kindnesses. The neighbor brought over chicken soup. My sister's voice on the phone had that mix of concern and practical plans. Gus seemed to know something was changing and slept more than he used to. Yet even as the ultrasound technician showed us a little flicker and told us the heartbeat was strong, I wrestled with the tiny doubt that had burrowed into me. It wasn't about accusing her of something specific so much as fearing the possibility of being wrong, about my place, about the trust I had allowed to fray, about whether a small absence could have created a wedge large enough that even a child couldn't fill. When the doctor did a routine blood draw, I found myself watching the vials like they were evidence in a case. There's a time lag in tests, and even longer for the way news filters through relationships. The rational thing, again, is to wait. But human hearts are impatient, and they manufacture storms to hold themselves accountable. We argued about the logistics. I wanted to confirm paternity. She wanted to delay, to keep things sacred until the baby existed outside of paperwork. We compromised. We would not make any moves until the baby was born. We would be a family if that scene arrived and then figure out the rest. It was a fragile treaty. Months passed. The pregnancy progressed. The city moved through its bright, indifferent cycles. I learned to talk to the child in the belly as if that small voice could grow a bridge between suspicion and belief. "Hi," I would whisper. "If you're mine, I promise to be decent. If you're not, I'll still be kind." There is something both noble and cowardly in promises you make to beings you have not yet met. Then late one spring night, as the wind came down with rain, Anna went into labor. It was fast. Hospital lights have a particular color that is neither comforting nor terrible. They are just functional. I stood in a corridor sweating the sort of sweat that is part terror and part awe. When the nurse brought our son to me, all the statistics and forms and spreadsheets and late-night suspicion condensed into the small, warm weight of a newborn. They took the standard blood sample for paternity if needed. We left the hospital with a tiny, swaddled figure and a pink bracelet with a number I couldn't memorize. We drove home slow and careful, Gus perched on my lap in the back like a security system with a tail. Anna slept on the passenger seat, holding her belly where the new life had no language but had everything else. There was an envelope in my coat pocket with instructions. If we wanted, we could request a paternity test, the nurse had told us. There was the normal line about lab timetables and confidentiality. The test would take weeks, weeks in which the thing I had feared could be addressed in paper and color, weeks that would be full of small domestic kindnesses and the return of a life that had felt so fractured. On the third day at home, with the baby asleep and the house folded into a light hush, Anna took my hand. "Ben," she said, "I want us to be a family. I know this is complicated and messy, but can we try?" The thing I had rehearsed saying forever once floated up from somewhere damp and small and honest. "Yes," I said. "Yes, we can try." She smiled then, the kind of smile that read like a small early weather. But there are things you cannot erase with a smile. That night, I lay awake in the other room while Anna nursed and watched the moon like a neighbor through the blinds. I pressed the envelope with the paternity kit between my palm and the mattress until I felt the edge of it like a thin, hard thing. In the morning, before coffee, before plates, the white envelope sat on the table. The result would take time. I found my phone buzzing with a message from a number I didn't know, but that was polite and brief. "Congrats. Hope all well." E. It was a small, innocuous thing on a day overloaded with a different kind of miracle. I held the baby's hand in mine that afternoon, a fist so fine it fit into my thumb like a secret. and I made a decision that felt both cowardly and brave. I left the envelope closed. I chose to be father first and detective second. The test could wait. Maybe waiting was itself a kind of grace. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was the only adult decision I could make then. We walked in the small park while the infant slept in a sling. People smiled at us with that odd, surprised tenderness reserved for new parents. At the bench near the pond, an old man fed pigeons and winked as if he had been through this too. Anna rested her head on my shoulder. Gus nosed our hands with gentle impatience. For a few minutes, the world arranged itself into a domestic picture, and the edges were soft. I cannot tell you what the right choice is. I will tell you this instead. I had been given an unexpected, fragile thing that could heal or could explode. Both outcomes were possible. I chose, on that bench, to let the small person sleeping against my chest define the day. The envelope remained in my pocket like a tiny stone. That night, when the house went still, I placed the sleeping child in his bassinet and sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold. The streetlight cast a thin rectangle across the floor. My phone lit up with messages, some from old friends, some from colleagues. One from Anna that read, "Thank you for coming, for staying." A good sentence, a true one in many ways. I thought about the tests and the possible answers. I thought about the spreadsheet, the receipts, the lipstick stains, and the nights I had driven through rain to see small private kindnesses played out in other rooms. I thought about how love is not a ledger and how people contain contradictions. I thought about how being a parent is often about choosing the small recurring acts that build a life, not about justice. The envelope sat on the table, innocuous, waiting. I could open it. I could mail the sample the next day. I could set a timer and make the test result into the hinge of whether I loved this child. Or I could let some days be quiet and let love be practiced as repetition rather than judgment. I put the kettle on, watched the steam creep like a slow apology. In the window, the moon had leveled into a thin coin. The child slept. The house breathed. I slid the envelope back into my pocket and walked out into the damp night with the baby in my arms, to stand under the fig tree and feel the rain. I thought I would find clarity in the cold, some revelation to tell me which story to pick and which to bury. No revelation came. Only the here and the now. The baby's chest, rising and falling, the soft rain on my coat, the distant headlights painting the road like a quiet promise. I found myself whispering, without rehearsal, "We're here." There is something honest about endings that never decide. The envelope will be opened someday, perhaps before the child starts school, perhaps never. The answer might arrive in ink and certainty, or it might stay suspended like a note unresolved. I don't know. I do know that for the first time in months I felt my chest unclench slightly when the baby made a tiny, perfect sound and turned his face toward me. That's the story. It is not neat, it is not heroic. It is a man learning, slowly and without drama, what it means to make a choice in the hollow between certainty and not knowing. I could have chosen otherwise. I might choose differently tomorrow. For now, I keep the envelope in my pocket and my hand on the child's back, and a willingness to be, as best I can, present. If you asked me whether jealousy was a monster in the dark or a tutor with a heavy cane, I couldn't tell you without lying. It was both. It taught me how to look and how to hurt. It taught me the price of proof and the cost of waiting. And this is the only honest part I can promise. You don't ever really know what love will ask of you until it asks it, and sometimes the only brave thing is to answer with an open hand.